Example there. Let's talk now to Paul Broadhead, who's head of mortgages and housing at the BSA. And Paul, why is this problem persisting? And it seems every time we talk about it to be getting worse.
It really does, Ben, doesn't it? I mean, well, we've known that house prices have outstripped earnings growth for many years. We're now seeing the most expensive since the 1950s, and that's that affordability stretch. Now, there's two parts to that. First of all is the price of buying, so that raising that deposit and getting the right size mortgage to purchase that home. And then, of course, the cost of owning, and that's where things have changed in the last couple of years with the increase in mortgage interest rates, putting that additional pressure onto first-time buyers.
Yeah, and it's also a supply and demand issue as well, isn't it, Paul, as always? And a lot of politicians from whatever party talk about the UK needing to build more homes. Time and time again, it just doesn't happen. Why is it so difficult to build the homes we need?
It really is tricky, isn't it? As you say, every prospective government says how important first-time buyers are, how important it is to build sufficient housing, and then invariably installs a revolving door for housing ministers to come and go. We've had 14 housing ministers in the last 13 years. Now, that short-termism is never going to get the job done at all. So what we need is a review of the first-time buyer market with some policies being brought forward by government and an independent chair to make sure that happens and the electorate can hold the government to account.
Yeah, but when we talk about incentives or policy measures to encourage or help first-time buyers, we saw things like Help to Buy, we've seen things like shared ownership schemes. All they seem to do is inflate the price of property. They don't actually help people get on. They just make it a bit more affordable and then they've got to pay it back later on.
And that's absolutely the challenge. I mean, what we've seen is rather than that long-term coherent policy is some short-term, often political stunts just to get us over the lap, to help people get on the housing ladder today, potentially at the expense of future first-time buyers. Now, the time for those political stunts and short-term policies has been and gone now. We need to start looking at this in the long term to make sure that we can support first-time buyers of today without disadvantaging those next generation of first-time buyers in the future.
Paul, what would be the biggest change? What would be the biggest help for first-time buyers, do you think?
I think there's two parts to it, Ben. One is housing supply and the government really getting a grip of that. The other thing that we can look at is since 2008 and the financial crisis, I think mortgage regulation has tipped slightly too far in favour of financial stability, often at the expense of enabling access to home ownership. We're now 2 million fewer owner-occupied mortgage holders in the UK than we had at the peak 20 years ago. We're back to those levels of the 1980s, and we've now got a larger population, so that also needs to change.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Let's see what changes, if anything. Paul, good to have you with us. Thank you. Paul Broadhead there, Head of Mortgages and Housing at the BSA. Thank you.